Welcome, Bronco Nation, to my weekly Top 25 rooting guide for Boise State fans, where we break down the top 25 matchups and how Boise State fans root in each of them. Yes, Boise State is out of the top 25. Not too far. They're still at 34th. They're still receiving votes. But yes, they're out of the top 25 for now. But that doesn't mean that the season is over, and that definitely doesn't mean that Boise State fans should just ignore what happens in the top 25 for a couple of reasons. First off, as I said in my post-game review video, Boise State's season is not over. They are fully in control, moving forward, not in control of their own destiny, but they are fully on track for two big things: to win the Mountain West and potentially to compete for a New Year's Six Bowl. It got harder with the loss to BYU, but it is not impossible. So Boise State has a lot of things that they need to be looking at, the top 25 rankings going forward. Couple of big things. All undefeated teams have to take a loss. If the more teams that have losses in that column, have one loss or more in that column, the less Boise State stands out as far as having that loss in their column, and the more they're able to interact then with the top 25 in that manner. The second thing is that all group of five teams need to take a loss, and that's kind of ties into the all teams need to take a loss, but this one is even more important. Boise State, if all to group of five teams that are in competition, the MAC is totally out of it. It doesn't matter if they go undefeated. They're not in the conversation this year. But all other group of five teams that are ahead of them, if they have a loss, when the committee comes out with their playoff rankings and they start looking, they're going to start looking at those losses. And when they start looking at Boise State's loss, what are they going to see? They're going to see a team decimated with injury on what was technically their fourth string quarterback, because Chase Courts is the third string and he's injured. Technically their fourth string quarterback, and a team that played well in the first half despite all the injuries, but it just snowballed coming into the second half. That's what they're going to be looking at. So Boise State, if they can play dominant, I'll be releasing my 3 keys to the game video. We'll be talking about that. If they can play dominant, they're completely back in this conversation as long as all those other group of five teams that are in competition ahead of them take a loss. So let's look at these. Most of these are going to be pretty self-evident, but we're also going to just this is just more to highlight them, get them on your radar. Make sure that you get your weekly guide set up for what you need to be watching, and a couple of them are a little bit more complicated, so we'll run into those. So first game we have is East Carolina versus Cincinnati, 5 p.m. Mountain Time, ESPN2. This is a really big game. East Carolina versus Cincinnati, they're going to be massive underdogs in this one, but East Carolina has shown the ability in the past to be that upset team. Cincinnati they are ranked number 7, they're ranked in the top 10, but I don't believe they're a top 10 team. It's not like Cincinnati's facing Alabama or Clemson or Notre Dame or even BYU. Cincinnati here is vulnerable, especially since this is kind of a trap game, with Cincinnati having played Houston last week, which really challenged them early, and then they ended up being able to run away with it, and playing UCF next week, who I think has the best ability or the best potential out of all the teams to knock off Cincinnati on their schedule. But ECU is a trap game for sure for Cincinnati, so keep that one on your radar unless it starts getting out of control there. But keep it on your radar, because I'm not predicting a win by Cincinnati in this one, but even if Cincinnati can play it close, they're going to discredit if East Carolina can play it close, they're going to discredit Cincinnati and their schedule. Western Carolina versus Liberty. Western Carolina FCS team playing their first game. I think they have 3 games scheduled this year. Probably not going to pull off the win against Liberty here, but for Boise State fans, with Liberty being ranked number 22, up there in that upper echelon, that 20 to 25 echelon of the top 25. Be good for Boise State fans. Liberty could take a loss there. It's going to be 10 a.m. Mountain Time on ESPN3. Any of those teams in the top 25, Boise State, even with a dominant win against Colorado State, isn't probably going to jump back into the rankings this week, but they can move up closer to those rankings, especially with other teams getting knocked out and then moving up over the top of them. And a win next week might pop them into the AP top 25, and the week after that, the college football playoff poll ranking is going to be coming out. So the more Boise State can build on the resume, the more teams. What Boise State is looking for here is confusion and chaos. The more confusion and chaos that there is in the top 25 rankings, the more that higher the likelihood that Boise State is going to be able to slip in here. So Western Carolina versus Liberty, Boise State fans are going to be rooting for a West Carolina win there. It's unlikely, but next game, Oregon versus Washington State. I apologize at the time. I'm making this video on Sunday. I'm going to get this video out to you on Monday just because games are starting up on Tuesday. It's very early. So at the time, it's still to be decided what the time, date, and it's going to be Saturday, but what the time and the channel, probably going to be ESPN, but what the channel is going to be for that. So number 11 Oregon versus Washington State. Both teams want to know. We're going to be rooting for Washington State to knock off Oregon here. Yes, it probably means Washington State's going to jump in the top 25 there. But like I said, chaos. The more chaos and uncertainty that there can be, if Washington State can beat Oregon, Washington State's going to get a loss somewhere down the road. They're just not as good a team this year after losing their incredible head coach to Mississippi State. So Washington State versus Oregon, that's what Boise State fans are going to be rooting for this week. USC versus Arizona. USC had a pretty good win last week versus Arizona State, I think is who they were playing. So they get to play the Arizonas back-to-back. They were challenged heavily by Arizona State, almost took the loss there. So Arizona 0-0. If they could beat USC, probably not going to jump to the rankings and would drop USC out of the rankings. Miami versus Virginia Tech. Miami, after taking a loss to Liberty last week in what was just an incredible upset game, definitely, even with the win over Miami, wouldn't be jumping the rankings. But Virginia Tech has looked very, very competent in so far this season. They were ranked somewhat high in the rankings at one point in the season. Even with a loss to Liberty, they're still a very good team. I think I am actually predicting a win in this one. You can put me on the record for that one. I think Miami has looked very, very vulnerable. They have not looked like a complete team. I think Virginia Tech has the potential to pull up an upset here, and that would significantly impact Miami, knocking them back without actually Virginia Tech jumping in the rankings, where Miami would then be vulnerable to potentially be knocked out again later in the season here, opening up room potentially for a Boise State team to come in. Michigan State versus Indiana. Michigan State is not having a good year so far. Indiana is having a good year at 3-0. Michigan State, though, is still Michigan State. They're still one of those historical top programs in the Big Ten. I expect them to get back on their footing and challenge Indiana this game. With the way the season's going, not sure they're going to win it. But if they can beat Indiana, they're not jumping in the rankings, and it would just throw more chaos there, number 10. And that's going to be 10 a.m. Mountain Time on ABC. And sorry, the game before that with Miami versus Virginia Tech is also 10 a.m. Mountain Time, ESPN2. And the USC-Arizona game is to be decided. I'm trying to get all of the times and streaming services this time, or not streaming services, but channels that are available. I keep forgetting to say them in my previous videos. Georgia versus Missouri. Missouri 2-3. They've kind of had an up and down year so far, but Georgia, after a big loss last week to Florida, fell back in the rankings. Missouri could knock off Georgia here. They're not going to be jumping into the rankings at all. That's a game Boise State fans are going to keep an eye on there, knocking Georgia back with another loss there, or they're going to be at 4-3 at that point. College football playoff rankings come out, could see them getting ranked further or even out of the rankings. So big statement here for Missouri to knock off Georgia. 10 a.m. Mountain Time on ESPN. Coastal Carolina versus Troy. Now, this is one of those big games. So Cincinnati versus ECU, that's huge. This game is really big for Boise State fans. Coastal Carolina, yes, they're Sun Belt, but they're ranked 15th in the country, and they're 7-0, and their schedule has been incredibly weak, one of the weakest in the country as far as top 25 teams go, as far as top 20 teams go. But they are ranked number 15th, and they do have a win over Louisiana, who was able to knock off Iowa State at the beginning of the season. So Coastal Carolina needs to take a loss either now or some point in the season. They might take a loss to Liberty at the end of the season. That's going to be a big matchup. But Coastal Carolina versus Troy. Troy 4-3, always one of those competitors in the Sun Belt. They look pretty good this year as well. So look for Troy to challenge Coastal Carolina. Probably one of the toughest games Coastal Carolina has played so far this season. Potential upset here and a big win for Boise State as far as that goes, knocking off an undefeated Group of 5 team in the top 25. 10 a.m. Mountain Time on ESPNU. Middle Tennessee versus Marshall. Really, at every week, it becomes more and more of a shame that Boise State didn't play Marshall this year. Because not only is Marshall a good team, which would have really helped Boise State's schedule, but now, if Marshall goes undefeated, they have a possibility to take that New Year's Six Bowl out from under a team like Boise State. So, incredibly unfortunate that Boise State didn't get to play them. 11:30 a.m. Mountain Time, CBS Sports Network, Middle Tennessee versus Marshall. Be great if Middle Tennessee could pull off the upset. Don't know if that's going to be the team to do it, but shouldn't worry Boise State fans too much. I think Marshall is going to take a loss here. They have games coming up against FIU at the end of the year. FIU hasn't been very good, but Marshall has looked vulnerable in several of their games this year. So be great if they could take a loss sooner than later, and they might end up taking a loss there in their conference championship game. I believe the Conference USA is still having a conference championship game. But Middle Tennessee, this is going to loom as a big matchup here. If Middle Tennessee can knock off Marshall, because the rest of the teams on Marshall's schedule, besides maybe an upset with FIU, they always have the ability to surprise somehow. Unlikely that Marshall's going to take necessarily another loss throughout the rest of the season. So Middle Tennessee, really one of those better upset opportunities. A game Boise State fans are going to want to keep an eye on. South Alabama versus Louisiana. 3-4 going up against number 25, popped in the rankings, Louisiana. 12 p.m. Mountain Time, ESPN Plus. Louisiana does not deserve to be ranked at all, but they are, and I think that they are going to be vulnerable against South Alabama team. I think that this is going to another one of those big games. I don't think it's a team Boise State fans necessarily have to worry about when the college football playoff rankings come out. I don't think that they're going to be in them, but this is one of those teams that keep an eye on. Be great if South Alabama could just make it 100% certain that they won't be in it, knocking them off. Notre Dame versus Boston College. 5-3 Boston College beating Notre Dame would be a huge upset, and Boston College has no chance of jumping into the rankings. Looking for that chaos. Notre Dame 7-0 after knocking off Clemson last week. Putting a loss in that column is going to help Boise State as far as blending in with the rest of the crowd there. So 1:30 p.m. Mountain Time, ABC. Ohio State versus Maryland. Maryland has just looked really bad since joining the Big Ten, but they're actually 2-1 this year, so off to a pretty good start. It'd be great if Maryland could knock off Ohio State. They probably would jump into the rankings there, but again, 3-0 Ohio State, the more chaos, the better. It's going to open up opportunities as far as the committee having to sort things out. So Maryland knocking off Ohio State would be a great opportunity there. 1:30 p.m. Mountain Time, Big Ten Network. Texas A&M versus Tennessee. Tennessee, again, is into one of those down seat years as they continue to try and rebuild. Not quite back there yet. Number 5, Tennessee, 1:30 p.m. Mountain Time, ESPN. Tennessee has had some tight games. They've looked like competitors in some of their, looked like real competition in some of their games, and in others not quite so much. So as far as SEC teams go, there's probably still a couple of seasons away from being back into one of those power teams to really compete in their division. But if Tennessee could pull off the upset here against Texas A&M, it'd be awesome. And again, throw more chaos in there without jumping into the rankings. Auburn versus Mississippi State. Mississippi State, of course, opened off the year with that great win over LSU, but now they're now 2-4 after suffering several bad losses. 2 p.m. Mountain Time, SEC Network against number 24 Auburn. I think Mississippi State's going to win this game. Be a great job, great opportunity here to knock off Auburn, allow Boise State to continue. They're not going to jump in the rankings this week, but knock a team ahead of Boise State there out of the rankings, opening up the door for Boise State down the road. Alabama versus LSU. Number 1 Alabama versus LSU, 4 p.m. Mountain Time, CBS. Usually this is a huge matchup. Probably not going to be that way after losing Joe Burrows and pretty much their entire coaching staff as far as who engineered that great season last year. Alabama's probably going to blow out LSU, but if LSU could win this game, it'd be a big step in kind of salvaging their season here, and it would allow LSU, and it would knock Alabama back without actually, and put a loss in that column without LSU threatening to jump into the rankings in any way. Arkansas versus Florida. Arkansas has actually looked very good this year. They are 3-3, but it is the SEC, and they have looked very good this year. If they could win against Florida, it'd be huge, and they wouldn't jump in the rankings. 5 p.m. Mountain Time, ESPN. SMU versus Tulsa, another one of those big games. 5 p.m. Mountain Time, ESPN2, number 19 SMU versus Tulsa. If Tulsa could knock off SMU, that would be great. If it worked out the other way around where SMU knocked off Tulsa, that would also work in Boise State's favor as Tulsa's kind of threatened to jump into the rankings throughout the season here. But both these teams already have a loss. I don't think they're going to challenge Boise State necessarily for that New Year's Six Bowl bid if that does come to pass. But Tulsa knocking off SMU here would be great to knock them out of the rankings, answer that question once for all, and it would discredit Cincinnati's real key win, which is against SMU. It's really their best win of the year. It really kind of discredit that and help Cincinnati to fall, maybe discredit their position in the top 10 at least. Wisconsin versus Michigan. Michigan, again, off to not a great year. But if they could beat Wisconsin, again, it'd be a great way of turning their season around, beating one of those top teams. Also, doesn't have a loss in the doesn't have a one in the loss column yet. 1-0 with 1-0 coming in at number 13. Great Michigan could knock off Wisconsin. 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time, ABC. Not likely at all for Michigan to jump into the rankings, even with a win against Wisconsin. Lastly, Northwestern versus Purdue. Both teams 2-0, but Northwestern up there at 23. Either team winning would actually work out for Boise State because Purdue is right now ahead of Boise State as far as the teams receiving votes. So 5:30 p.m. Mountain Time, Big Ten Network. A win by Purdue would knock Northwestern out of the rankings, but also probably put Purdue into them, and a win by Northwestern would knock Purdue back. I think Boise State fans should be rooting for a win by Purdue in this just to knock out that team that is for sure in the top 25. But again, either way is going to really work out okay. So as you can see, there are a lot of really big matchups, especially as far as the group of 5 go, which is really going to impact Boise State. A lot of really big matchups. So Boise State fans, big game on Thursday for Boise State. That's when they're going to be playing Colorado State at 6 p.m. Mountain Time on FS1. So that is the big game of the weekend. But after that, there's a lot of other good games to keep yourself glued to the television and looking for some big upsets there, knocking off some of that competition ahead of Boise. So make sure that you keep an eye on that. Make sure if you like these videos that you like and subscribe. Of course, I give a weekly three keys to the game video and a review video, and I'm also starting to do a NFL alumni, Boise State NFL alumni video where we just look in on Boise State's NFL players, how they're doing as far as stats go. So thank you for watching these videos. Make sure to join Bronco Nation so you can root on our Boise State Broncos with over 8,000 other fans. And again, thank you for watching my video today. All right, go Big Blue!